Hello, welcome to Read Scholars Live. I'm your host, Dr. Mary Fleming, and current president of Read Scholars. Today, I am joined by Greg Ewing, and he's going to be our guest. And I'm going to let him share his story because he has a unique journey into law and public health that I think the audience would like to hear from him better than me. So, welcome. How are you today?
I'm doing well, and I want to say that I'm really honored and appreciative of this opportunity. Dr. Reed was at the medical school while I was at the School of Public Health, and she was very supportive of my education, and in fact gave me a couple of ideas in terms of where I could go to advance my career. So this is, truly an honor in recognizing her greatness and the impact she's had on minority students passing through Harvard Medical School, the School of Public Health.
And we are, of course, immensely grateful for Dr. Reed, hence the Reed Scholars, and her reach is amazing. She's just touched so many people over the years and continues, and that's always been part of her goal and legacy, right? And for us to continue to touch people, which I think we're doing that, right? So I think it would be great to just start with a little bit of a history about your journey. And what led you to law, and then prompted your decision to add a public health degree. So we know that's a unique, it's not unheard of, but a unique combination, right?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'm actually going to kind of start a little bit earlier.
Please.
I'm a product of my grandparents raised me. My first memories of life were the housing projects of Milwaukee, Hillside Projects. My mother and father divorced, and so I remember my mother raising me, and my father, he just stayed in Boston, and so actually I was born in Boston, which is kind of funny.
Yeah.
And so, for me to kind of want to be here, being someone of interest and having, a degree from Harvard is just kind of incredulous. One of my early experiences in terms of understanding the importance of advocacy and having someone having your back was in kindergarten. And I remember being in kindergarten, and one of my classmates, came up to me. He says, "Well, I know we're going to fail." And I'm thinking, and I told him, I said, "Well, how can we fail? They read to us, we eat cookies, we take naps. What is there to fail?" Well, it turns out that the teacher failed the whole class. And by the way, Milwaukee is extremely segregated, so everyone in the class was Black. The teacher was an old German woman. And so I passed, but the only reason why I passed is because I had an uncle who was a psychiatrist, and the teacher claimed that I was hyperactive. And so he wrote something that basically said, "I've observed this young man, and in my professional opinion, he is not hyperactive." And so I was the only one who passed kindergarten. And so, at an early age, I realized that it's important to have an advocate. And a lot of people, their success and failure is depending on, the advocates that they have in their corner. So fast forward, so I went to, all Black everything, all Black high schools. I was kind of a little wild. I was strong academically, but then again, it was a poor performing school system. My school was considered probably the worst in the Milwaukee public school systems, which probably made it worse in the state. And Milwaukee still ranks, near the bottom nationally in terms of performing school systems. When I graduated, the average reading level of graduating senior was 8th grade. Fortunately for me, my great-grandfather was a high school principal. So I am actually like 4th generation college graduate, but my grandmother, as a result of an unwed pregnancy, was kind of, she had to start from the bottom. Her parents disowned her. There's circumstances around that particular pregnancy that she doesn't want to discuss. My father never met his father, so therefore he didn't know how to be a father. So there's all this emotional baggage that I have in my head. So, but because my grandmother basically came from a family of education, she did a couple of years in college before she got pregnant, and they pulled the rug underneath her. She kind of gave us a structured environment for us to study. And I had an older sister, and I was just competitive. So I just, wanted to study and wanted to be better than her. So my goal was just to make sure my GPA was higher than hers. I didn't really know what hers was, but I ended up being a high school valedictorian. And the reason that happened is that I figured out that if you get grade, if your cumulative grade is based on your year-end cumulative, that means if I get graded 6 times, I can have 4 A's and 2 B's and end up with an A A average. And I said, well, why am I going to kill myself? So I'm shooting for like a 3.6 every time so I can get to that, that magical number. And there were a couple of times when I get all A's anyway. And it's like, man, I just wasted my time. So during high school, I was actually suspended a couple of times. The first time I was suspended, my grandmother, I had to call my grandmother because I didn't know what to do. And so she was angry. And so, but I acted indignant and told the vice principal that there was obviously a mistake and that you must not know who I am and the kind of grades I get. And his response is, well, if you go to class, sometimes you'll get good grades. And I said, well, I'm getting good grades. I'm 3.5, 3.7. I was like a 3.9, it turns out. And so it turns out that the dates that they had for me, I actually had valid excuses for them. And so when I came in and gave him the dates, he says, well, I have other dates. And I said, well, that's nice. You suspended me for those dates, not the other dates. And my grandmother was there. She looked at him and she says, do you think I have time for this kind of stuff? Only she didn't use stuff. And so as we're walking out the hall and I'm walking her out of the school, she looks up at me and she says, I know you did it. So the next time I got suspended, I didn't tell her. So I ended up going to Oberlin to study music, actually, as a result of a teen pregnancy. My oldest son was born 2 weeks before I graduated from high school. Over the summer, the parents wanted me to marry Jean, his mother, whenever they said the word. And I said, no. And they said, well, what do you mean no? I said, I'm only 17 years old. You can't expect me to get married. I said, I'll tell you what, give me 2 years of college and I'll marry her. I didn't think it was a good idea. I didn't think it was going to work, but I was willing to commit to it. So I came home that evening and I was supposed to go to Marquette that had given me a 4-year free ride. They wanted me to study chemistry because that's really where my strength was in the sciences. And then it turns out their plans for me is, okay, Greg's going to study chemistry and then we're going to get him in med school and then he's going to be a doctor in Milwaukee. He's going to be the pillar of the community. What their plan was for me. So meanwhile, I go home that evening and my grandmother, she's, watching TV and I say, Oberlin looks pretty good right about now. She says, yes, I think you should leave town too. So that's how I ended up going to Oberlin. And, I'm 17 years old. This is really my first time away without any adult supervision. And so I was very, very scared. And then also coming from a poor performing high school was very challenging. So I said, I need to get out of this place. And so I said, I think if I can become a music major, I can get out of here with that. It's too, the requirements aren't that hard, 2 years of theory, 2 years of history, 2 years of performance. I can do that and anything else. And so that's how I became a music major. And so I tend to adopt the roles that I assume. And so since I was a music major, I became a musician, lived the life. Then I came to Boston to study jazz. I went to Berkeley for a year. And at the time, Oberlin didn't offer saxophone, but Berkeley did. So I wanted to study saxophone at Berkeley, whereas at Oberlin, I only studied the flute. So I did Berkeley for a year. And then there was a period of my life when I was homeless, like right after a year of Berkeley. And so I didn't have a job. I didn't have any money. And even though my father, turns out he worked, I could walk to his office in 20 minutes. We weren't close. And so I'm sleeping on my friend's floor. And one night his roommate had this epiphany and he says, wait a minute, I don't have to go to law school. I don't have to be a musician. I can go to law school and represent musicians. So I'm sitting on the floor thinking, I didn't know you could go to law school with a music degree. And so I said, I'll keep that in mind. So my music career began to flourish. I toured for 3 years. I met my first and second wives. I met my second wife first. And so then I left the band and then I did sales management and I needed an advanced degree because my career wasn't going where I wanted it to go. And so that's how I ended up going to law school. And the other funny part is that I had two great uncles who were both lawyers. One of them, they were admitted into the bar at 37 and 39. And one of them is the first African-American to be a member of the Cincinnati bar in 1950. But yet, I remember my grandmother had an envelope and it had from somebody ESQ. And I said, well, what does that ESQ mean? And she says, well, that means that person's a lawyer. And I'm thinking back then, I'll never have that behind my name. So it's kind of, it's kind of amazing, really, really feel really, really blessed for my career. So I go to law school. After law school, I go to the Harvard School of Public Health and, and we had a strategy, my mentor and I. We met everybody we needed to meet. We met Black professors. We met the people assigned to recruit minorities, and we met everyone. And we sent in my application, and then Harvard said no. And so my mentor says, well, you got the wrong letter. Obviously, that was sent to you by mistake. So would you like to appeal? And I thought, well, if I appeal and they still say no, I'm still in the same position. So we wrote a letter back and said, dear Harvard, you claim that you're interested in these various public health issues, but you fail to give credit to people who have experience in and who are victims of this particular syndrome. And so we wrote the letter, we made our rounds again, and 6 weeks later they accepted. And so it was very, very exciting and very, I learned a tremendous amount in terms of going to Harvard, and I wanted to go there for my doctorate, but the dean made it clear that the only way I was coming back to Harvard was as an alumnus. So I ended up going to Brandeis and working on my PhD in health policy. And so fortunately and even though I tried, well, actually, while at Brandeis, I had a friend of mine who went to this event where they were kind of touting what it took to be in the big law firms. And he met an African-American gentleman who was at one of the big law firms. And long story short, this guy gave me an interview, and it turns out that as a result of him, I got a job working at one of the large firms. But unfortunately, even, it's like kind of having the Harvard degree and the MPH, it's a two-edged sword. On the one hand, people like to say they have the Harvard chip. On the other hand, they want to knock you down and say, you're not that smart. Yeah. And so I went and worked there, and I worked for a gentleman. And when I met him, I looked at him, he looked at me, and it was like looking at the devil. And I said, this isn't going to work out. And it didn't. So after that, I said, I want to do policy. Given my background, it only makes sense. And no one would hire me in policy. I couldn't do any policy. I couldn't do any public health. I had the closest thing I got was that when Massachusetts got their tobacco settlement, the Department of Health needed somebody who was an attorney who could be a liaison between the Department of Health and the Attorney General's office. So they wanted someone who understood public health. They wanted someone who understood health policy and someone who was a lawyer. And so when they saw me, they were like shocked. They just couldn't believe it. So they kept asking for more writing samples, more and more interviews, and more letters of recommendation. So finally, after what seemed to be like 8 interviews, they said, okay, we're going to hire you. We're going to let you work here. We want you to work here part-time, and we want to pay you $10 an hour. And I said, well, I have a friend who works for the Department of Public Health now. She has a master's of science in public health from Harvard. She's getting $25 an hour. I have a MPH and a law degree. Why am I only getting $10? They never call me back. Wow. So as a result of basically underemployment in Boston, I ended up working at basically going into corporate and regulatory, doing HIPAA compliance for the District of Columbia. I've been to California. I was in-house counsel at Sutter Health. I worked after Sutter. I worked for the Air Force doing HIPAA security. So in addition to my MPH, I now have a certification in certified information systems security professional. I have another certification as cybersecurity, like architect, and a certified data privacy specialist or something. I have 3 certifications, and I don't remember what they are, what they mean. You can look them up. It's on LinkedIn. That's a lot. And so I've so what I guess the advantage of bouncing around is you have different experiences at different locations. So now the job that I'm currently at, I'm chief compliance officer at Trillium Health, which is a federally qualified health center lookalike in Rochester, New York. I get to use all of my skills. I get to be a lawyer. I get to do privacy. I get to do security. I get to do compliance. I get to do regulatory analysis. I get to do real estate. So it's like Christmas every day. Every day is something new, and it's just really, really exciting. But it's been very, very difficult, and there have been times when my career has been very bumpy, and there have been times when I just have to believe in myself when many people don't, and when you kind of and it affects you mentally, because you begin to say, well, I don't understand, what does it take? There have been, I've had instances where people have called me, like, huge health plans, said, look, we see your resume online. We need somebody like you in our company. And of course, it just never works out. Mm-hmm. I interviewed at one national, actually probably international company. And so I asked the last person interviewing me, who, by the way, had no experience in healthcare, but he had been there 3 weeks. I said, well, what don't you like about this company? And he says, well, I don't like the fact that we don't have a diversity here. And he says, I'm a white guy. And I'm thinking, and I just thought about it and said, he's right. I saw a couple of people of color, but they're in very low level, entry level admin positions. And then he says, but I guess, that's because we only hired the best people. And I'm thinking, oh my God. And I said, great, Greg, wait till you get this job and then you straighten them out. And then as I left, I said, they're not going to hire you because they think the same way. And sure enough, they didn't hire me. During the interview, they wanted an attorney that could embed himself in the IT security department, which was what I was doing when I was at Blue Cross Blue Shield. It was a natural fit. All of a sudden on the interview, they began to say, well, we're not sure you've actually been an attorney. Oh, let me tell you about this $500 million fraud and abuse case I worked on. Let me tell you about these hospital mergers I worked on. Let me tell you about, this sick building syndrome trial that I worked on. Let me tell you about this real estate deal. Let me tell you about this, this criminal prosecution that I represented the defendant on. And because of my strategy in terms of like setting up a visual presentation for the psychologist direct, he will be out probably in 20 years versus the 103 years that the prosecution was asking for. Oh, well, you have all this experience. You can help so and so and so because they don't know it. Okay, so I can help them. I can do my job. I have more experience than you need, but yet I don't get the call.
Right.
And so there has been many instances in my life where the answer, even though it seemed very clear that I was clearly qualified, and of course there have been the instances where, we're definitely going to hire you. All we need to do is talk about salary. We're going to call you on Friday, or we're going to call you on Monday, and they never call back. Okay. Or there's been instances where, I interviewed at one company where it was great on the phone. In fact, it was so great, she's asking me for advice. I have this problem. What should I do? So I'm giving her advice. So now I'm interviewing, and this is in California. Now comes time for the interview. I interview with all the other people, and the person I'm speaking to, which will be the person who I will report to, she comes down last. So I'm standing under the door, and she gets off the elevator, and she looks, and she's like looking all around like, there must be somebody else here. There must be somebody else. And she sits down with this frown on her face, which I thought, well, maybe she had a bad day and she'll, lighten up. Never did. So the last question is, well, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I see myself in the same position because it'll take me 3 years to really get comfortable. In 2 years, I can really put my stamp on it. And she sighs, she says, yeah, that's the right answer. Okay, well, we're interviewing people. We have 2 weeks worth of interviews, and we're going to call you back and let you know what happens. Okay, this is a Friday. On Monday, they call me. We're not interested. So I thought, so we don't know who we're going to get in the next 2 weeks, but we know we don't want you. And so it's been very, 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 very trying and very stressful. Unfortunately, I have a very forgiving and supportive wife. Because, I've been, again, started in Boston. 3 weeks after we got married, I was in DC for 3 years, then California, then Virginia for a year, then Texas for 6 months, then Maryland for 5 years, now Rochester for 3 years. And it's just like, it's like ping pong. But, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, finish your thought.
But, the other part, it's, I look at, recently, America is catching on to the fact that public health is racism is a public health issue. Indeed. And so, I recently thought, well, back in the 30s, at Howard, they had, a cadre of lawyers that basically worked to dismantle desegregation. Why couldn't Harvard or similar schools put together a cadre of lawyers to say, okay, this is a public health issue. We can clearly begin to define what the damages are, and then put together a system so we can dismantle racism or just make it very, very painful for people who want to continue to practice in that area. And so it seems that should be something that we might want to consider, because I didn't get into law to really, to do corporate. I like what I do. I really wanted to be an advocate, and I really wanted to help people. And, what I do, fortunately, because I'm in an FQAC, I can see visibly, what my work does. And we're clearly, our goal is, what can we do with our resources to maximize our resources, bring more people in, bring more people of color, and make more people aware of what we do? How do we do that? And so that's good versus being at Blue Cross Blue Shield, where I'm basically helping them get into another deal, which makes the company more money. And then when you you were on some of these, like big division-wide meetings, and it's clear that it's not a nonprofit mission. It is a mission to get more people signed up and make more money and more revenue. So it's been quite an interesting journey. And if someone were to if someone wanted to go to law school, given the prices, I don't know what I would say. It's like if I had to do it all over again, I love my life, particularly coming with a music degree and then coming from my background and where I am. It's just I'm very, very thankful. And when I was younger, I wasn't thankful because I knew that I was going places. Mm-hmm. Now when I look back and look at my journey and see where I've gone, and then there have been times. In fact, there was one time when I was out of a job, and we were leasing a house that we were going to buy, and I can't buy it because I don't have any money. And then the owner says, well, because the finance company had issues with you, they can't count the revenue you're getting from leasing your other house. We will do owner financing. So I'm sitting here thinking, I'm going to have to buy this house because I can't tell them I don't have a job. They're going to kick me out. And if I go someplace else, the first question they're going to ask is, where are you working? So I'm sitting at the closing table buying this house, knowing that I don't have a job. And it was a surreal experience. It was just like, I don't know how this is going to work. And somehow, I kept the house for like 5 years, 6 years, and never missed a payment. But it's just, sometimes you just have to walk in faith and believe that things are going to work out. But it's just been very, very tough. And, one of the things I carry with me through life is something I learned when I was at Oberlin studying classical music. One of my professors said, you play classical, the secret to playing classical music is to play a difficult piece, but make it look easy. Mm. So I try to make all of this look easy, like it just flows and it's cool, everything's good. But, meantime, it's like, the stress build up, and, I run, I exercise, and, meditate, do yoga, but you have to kind of release it because it could drive you crazy.
Wear you down. One of the things I enjoy about doing the podcast is learning people's stories and their journey. And, just listening to your story, we can talk about, we could have a whole 5 other conversations about health disparities, right? You talked to us about inner city segregation and poverty. You talked about poor performing education systems and how that can affect your life, right? You talked about job instability and homelessness, and we know those are all issues that disproportionately affect people of color in this country, and how those intertwine and how you have to overcome. And can you overcome when you have a stable support system, which you've had, and you highlighted that. And so those are all important topics. And I think, and I'm still marvel, and I guess I shouldn't, that we now actually say racism out loud in normal conversation. And I think being like a kid growing up, that was almost like a taboo word, like especially in what we would say mixed company, right? Mm-hmm. And so now that we're talking about it openly and as a public health issue, and you're right to push that we usually keep these things separate, like, what are the ramifications for racism in medicine? There's no accountability, right? You can sue me if you have a complication during labor and you have a tangible outcome, or an adverse outcome to a delivery. If a physician mistreats you and it's a racist, has racist undertone, there's no real repercussions for that. We haven't built the system around that because that's not what the system was built to do, right? The system wasn't built for us and to protect us in that way. But now that we have the language and now that we have the momentum, I agree. I think we need to do something different, and hold people accountable and advocate for ourselves and, for others. So that we don't continue to be mistreated in the healthcare system. So I think those are all super valid points and super helpful.
I mean, we look at like the African-American doctor who had COVID was saying, look, I know you guys are mistreating me. I should be having this medication. And it basically is like, we don't care. We don't care. We're gonna mistreat you and she dies. And it's like, how can that be? How can we look at like, African-American women that die in childbirth? How can that be? It's some of the stuff is mind-boggling. I know Kamara Jones did a did a graph, and she talked about how, and she said she was trying to figure out something about, like, the difference between Black women and white women. And she had this dream, and she, in her dream, she laid these two charts on top of one another. And then she did it in real life. And she realized that basically, white women, Black women, their stress levels, symptoms they have are the kind that you would see in white women that are 10 years older. It's like, and yet no one wants to acknowledge it. And people want to just say, well, of course, with Obama, we're post-racist, and then we realized that the white nationalists like really geared up, and then with Trump, they just said we just, it's okay, it's open. See, we can just say who we are, and now you have it's just really it's just an imposing, an oppressive system that just makes it very, very difficult. And one of the things I'm trying to do in Rochester is, our biggest employer is the University of Rochester Medical Center. And I'm on the board, and I said, look, if we're the biggest employer, why don't we have a program where me as an African-American child at age 6, I started learning about like opportunities in healthcare. Everyone's not going to be a doctor. Some people will be lab techs, some people will be IT, but some people will be nurses, some people will be doctors, some people will be pharmacists. But unless we populate and let everybody know that this is the industry and this is where you go and prepare them, we can't do that. And 24% of all IT professionals in America come from India. And it's not that IT is that difficult. It's just that we are underperforming schools don't allow people to be at a certain level where they can actually go into those programs and successfully compete. And when you go where we're not prepared to go in, and it's very difficult when something is bumping up against your head, telling you don't get it, and then you've been diminished and oppressed all your life, and that adds, and you just say, I guess I'm not worth it. I guess it's not me. I know when I was at Oberlin, I had a girlfriend she was from Haiti, and her parents, her father hated me. Her father said I wasn't dark enough, I wasn't dark enough, I wasn't tall enough, I wasn't Haitian, I wasn't rich, and I wanted to be a musician. So there wasn't much I could change. So I said, okay, I'm going to be a math major. I really want to marry this woman. So I go to the head of the math department, says, well, since it's been a couple of years, I want to start with, pre-calculus. Of course, my high school, we didn't have calculus. So I'll, basically get back in the groove and then go to calculus. No, you should take multivariable calculus. But I've never taken calculus. Oh, well, this will be real easy. And of course, I take it, I'm totally confused. And so I end up not being a math major. And it's like, why would he tell me something like that? And it's like, it's kind of a mid-level course. Why would you tell me to take this course knowing that I'm going to fail it? Knowing that I have no concept of what this is. And that happens all the time. People say, okay, we want you to do this. And it's like, they don't give you support. I think of my experiences in the large law firm. They said, Greg, we want you to do this. And yet they don't tell me, here's the purpose of why you're doing it. Here's what you should be looking for. Let me give you an example. Like, here's this document, here's what you do, here's what you pull out. And so then when you make a mistake, then they say, well, you didn't know what you're doing. You never told. Or the flip side is that I wrote a document. They wanted me to do an analysis on this merger. Well, no, these two nonprofits wanted to buy this building, and the question is, would they have to pay taxes on the building? And they didn't have the opportunity to form like a new nonprofit company. So how do they take advantage of their nonprofit status? So they said, we want you to talk to our tax attorney. Well, it turns out it was an LLC. I've been studying LLCs all summer on my own, and so to me, the answer was fairly straightforward. If it's structured and they're both structured as a partnership and they have pass-through tax treatment, if they're not paying taxes as a nonprofit, then the partners won't have to pay taxes. So it's a de facto nonprofit LLC. So I turn it in. Their response to me is, you didn't talk to Forrest. They didn't say I was wrong. They didn't say my analysis was bad. They just said I didn't talk to Forrest. So now years later, I'm interviewing with this firm in Connecticut. And it turns out they're the other firm on the other side of the table. So he asked for a writing sample, and that was the sample that I happened to bring. And I didn't know who they were. And so he says, well, explain it to me, because I guess he figured I didn't know what was in it. So I explained it to him, and he says, you're absolutely right. And I say, you know what? That's the most feedback I've ever gotten on this memo. Why is that? And so you experience all of these things. And you know, and it's a lonely journey. And particularly like, you know, now in generations after me, so a lot of people that are sitting in, let's say, my seat in law school in Harvard, they come from middle class families, they come from private education. They, you know, my daughter went to a private school, and she said when she went to NYU, she thought it would be tough, and she thought she'd be an oddity, and she thought it would be tough too. She
Yeah.
says everybody there comes from private education schools, or they're valedictorian and high performing public schools. And she says, "You want me to write a 5-page paper? Sure." I was in a writing class with only 6 people in the class. That's not a problem.
Yeah.
But you know, when you come from a disadvantaged background and you don't have the tools, and you don't have people that give you the emotional support, or the, you know, the support you need in terms of helping you get the tools, and you know, and you don't have, let's say, the mental strength that you need just to believe in yourself and just say, I'm going to make it because I have to. It's very, very tough. And those are, you know, those 3 variables, and all, it's not like if you have one that's good, you know, one is, you have one, but the scale is 1 to 100. Where is that person? Well, they only get 30. You know, it's like, and you know, I've had people, you know, oh, I'll be your mentor. What is that? Oh God.
Yeah.
And on the other part is, you have to have a mentor. My mentor helped me get into these schools, but he had never really worked, so he couldn't help me in the job market. So when I'm going to these companies, it's just me, and I tell people it's like I'm in a pond and I have I'm in a rowboat and I have one pedal, and I'm just hoping I get to a safe place on the shore, because I don't have any guide. I don't have anybody that's saying, "Oh yeah, come over here, we'll help you," and
Right.
it's just really, really tough.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, we've had those conversations too, just to comment on the last thing about when you're in these high performing organizations, and the mentorship is disproportionate, right? And so we talk about racism and disproportionate access, but that can look like so many things. And it can just look like you have a mentor and I don't. And therefore, how you expect me to elevate, but I don't have the support and I don't have the resources to do that. And I feel like that you've echoed that a few times during the conversation today. It's like you blame my failure on me when I didn't have the tools that I needed in order to succeed. So it's
Right.
an unfair game.
I had when I was going through my divorce, I hired an attorney that I used to work for. Excuse me. Hi. And so I'm sitting there, and he's talking about my divorce. And so he's Italian, so he gets a call from one of his Knights of Columbus fellow members. Thank you. Have a good weekend. So his friend says, well, you know, my son just finished his first year of law school, and he's looking for a job. And Richard says, don't worry, you know, I'll hire him. And even if he doesn't work out, if he's no good, he can still continue to work here. All right, thank you very much. Click. So now Richard is sitting there, and he says, now I have to interview 4 people, knowing that I'm not going to hire them. And I said, in a different world, I'd be one of those 4 people. And so, you know, it's just like, it's not about you know, it's not about qualifications. My brother-in-law has a undergrad degree from Princeton. His law degree is from Northwestern. So he used to be the bureau chief of the U.S. Attorney's Asset Forfeiture Unit. So in other words, if I get popped for selling like drugs, and then after they convict me criminally, they come and they take all my money. He had, the unit was running so well that it was the model of the nation, and other U.S. attorneys would come in and see how he's doing it. So now a new governor comes in town, they elect a new AG, and the new AG says, I want that spot for my buddy. So my brother-in-law's out. So you figured, no problem. Princeton undergrad, Northwestern law, you know, top 10 law school, Princeton is Princeton. No one would hire him. Nobody would hire this guy. And he's one of the smartest guys that I've ever met. We're hardworking, you know, and it's like, how can that be? And that's kind of, you know, Boston, but it's not just Boston, you know, it's just other people. It's like, we all have the stories where we get off the elevator and the person looks at us and like, what? You know, it's like, we all have the stories. When I was going through my changes with the big law firm, I was dating a woman whose her former boyfriend had gone to Georgetown, and he had worked at a law firm. She says, Greg, what you're telling me is almost word for word the experience that he had had.
Yeah.
And and again, you don't have a mentor. You don't go in. There's no one saying, okay, I envision you going from here to here. Let's equip you to go to here. And it's like, and then I've been another story. Friend of mine went to law school. He says, Greg, actually, while I was there, wasn't me specifically. He's going to the money in insurance is reinsurance. So he's going to go to the University of Connecticut and get a master's of law in reinsurance, and then he's going to make a lot of money. And I said, look, I think that's a great idea, but I have to kind of tell you, just because you have that degree, that you might not get it. And I said, I don't want to burst your bubble, but the fact of the matter is, I'm sitting here in Roxbury, Massachusetts, off Mission Hill, talking to you with a Harvard degree, talking to you about going ahead. I said, look, it doesn't necessarily work that way, but I want you to succeed and I wish you well. So he gets the degree. Doesn't happen. And it's just really sad that people want to say, well, we can't find qualified people. We can't find the right people, when there are just people walking around with all kinds of degrees and all kinds of brilliance. And yet, we're not given the opportunity.
Well, I've already kept you too long, but I want to ask you one more question before we go.
Sure.
So, we've all kind of had an interesting year in the last year, to say the least. And I think it's been a great year to learn about, a lot of personal reflection, a lot of national reflection. And so I always just kind of end with asking people on what you're looking forward to, whether what you've learned in the past year or what you're looking forward to as we hopefully are turning the corner here soon.
I think we bought a house about a year and a half ago, May of 2019, about a year and a half ago, whatever that is. And so I've learned to enjoy my house a lot more. I was fortunate. They built a new Y in my area, and they say it's the largest Y in the country. But the way they situated it, and since we moved, in order for me to go there, I have to go before work, which means I have to, put my suit and everything. And it's a big pain in the butt. And so I said, I know some mornings I just won't want to go through all of that. So let me get a treadmill and let me get some other stuff in my basement. And so when I don't want to get there, then, I'll just get on the treadmill. So all of that arrived, and then COVID happened. And it's like, oh, it's great for me. I go on the treadmill, do my 5 miles, I jump in the shower, and 20 minutes later, I'm on a conference call. I was like, I love this. There's saving money on gas, saving money on dry cleaning, saving money on eating out, and, all that stuff. So it's great for me. I lost 27 pounds. But what do I look forward to? I look forward to a time when we can go back to some degree of normal. I'm not quite sure what that looks like. I think there will still be a lot of mask wearing. I still think that, as a result of COVID, people now realize a lot of people can work remotely, and companies are going to scale back because they start looking at their real estate holdings and the leases and say, why are we leasing on this space when, Greg can work from home, and that's, save some money. And so I know that. I also look forward to hopefully us becoming more united as a country. I'm, I guess, pessimistic that that's actually going to happen, but I just have to believe that ultimately we're going to make small steps, incremental steps in terms of us becoming more united. I think probably one of my best times in America was right after 9/11, when everybody was like, we're all Americans, and people just kind of treated you like we're all in this together. And that lasted for about 2 or 3 months, and everybody went back to the way they normally are. And maybe, I guess not, I won't see that in my lifetime long term. But we have to, recognize that it's difficult for other people to understand other people's pain. Because, you can't understand what it's like coming from, years of legacy of slavery. You look at Kenny Clark or Dr. Clark with the Dow experiments, the blackers. You like the black Dow, you like the white Dow. How does that make you feel? Someone asked me, well, why is it that, white person said, why is it important that, in your mind or in your house, Jesus would be black? And I said, well, why don't you have a black Jesus in your house? Like, why is it so important to you? Why would he? Why it's like the psychological toll that we're taking as a people is just really enormous. And, I'm optimistic that, you know, Biden will do a lot of things. I'm hopeful, but ultimately you can't change the 677 people who voted for Trump. You know, you can't change the people that were scaling the walls on January 6th, and the people that are behind them, and the constituents that they represent, and the forces and the friends and family. You can't, you know, you can't change all of that. And you can't change people thinking, well, you know, I wasn't involved in your slavery, so therefore I shouldn't have to pay. You shouldn't get over it. And the fact that I have an equal degree and you have an equal degree, we're at the same starting block. No, we are not. Because, you know, it's, you know, no opportunities. Who's going to hire you? What, you know, it's just really, it's and how do you raise your kids? It's like, you know, my grandparents, because they raised me in, you know, a couple of generations back. And so the question is, you know, I'm raised right when, you know, the marches and everything is going on. So they're thinking, well, what do we say? And they decide we're not going to say anything. And now, you know, when I raise my kids, it's like, I have to tell them this is tough. And it was very difficult, particularly when I was separated and my kids are from my first marriage, with the exception of my oldest son. And, you know, they're seeing their mother who's doing very, very well, and I have all these degrees, and I'm, you know, living in this jacked up apartment and underemployed. And every time they ask me for money, I have to say, I don't have it. And then their mother's saying, well, you know, you're whatever. And I said, look, there was nothing more that I'd like is for you to say, Greg, I need money, and just write the check and say, here you go. I don't take joy out of saying I don't have it. And so it's like, how do I tell them education is important when for a large period of my life, it didn't seem like it was worthwhile. And so fortunately now I'm doing well, but it's taken me a while to get here. And you know, and then the question becomes, okay, now that I'm here, what do I balance? Do I balance staying here, or do I use this as a position of good? And then how much what's the balance? You know, am I willing to give all of this up for the betterment of society? And, you know, and it's like, I ask those questions, like, where's my comfort? Am I a sellout because I want to have a decent life? And, you know, and again, it's not just supporting me, it's supporting my wife. It's being a resource for my kids when they call and say, I need money. Okay, I can help you. Or they need advice, I can help you. So those are the things that I struggle with. And I hope this year will be better. I think, you know, right now people are willing to have a discussion about racism, and, you know, there's still people that don't understand what Black Lives Matter is about. Right. We still need to have discussion about police brutality. You know, growing up in Milwaukee, all the brothers that I knew who were taken down to the Milwaukee police department, they all went downtown, they got their butts kicked, and they said each time, these are people that don't know each other. The guest desk sergeant would say, well, what happened? They fell. Even when I was shot in Milwaukee as a result of a robbery. And so there's a hospital 10 minutes away, but they took me to county, which was 45 minutes away. So the bullet went from upper hip to the lower bottom all the way through, and I'm laying in the ambulance. And so the driver, and these are like police officers, he said, well, give him something to stop the bleeding. Why bother? He's going to go into shock soon. And I'm just laying there saying, I don't believe this is happening. And so again, 10 minutes later, give him something to stop the bleeding. He's going to go to shock. He's going to go into shock soon. And again, I'm laying there. So finally, another 10 minutes goes by. He says, give him something to stop the bleeding. He says, oh, he's still alert. Here, hold this. So I'm holding gauze on my hip. Of course, you know, the bullet went all the way through, so the blood's coming out the back. And by the time I got to the hospital, they said, do you know that you have an arrhythmic heartbeat? I said, well, what does that mean? That means that your heart beats irregularly. It doesn't beat, it goes beep, 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 beep. I said, no. And then what had happened is I had lost so much blood that there wasn't enough blood to keep my heart beating. And fortunately, I was young. Just think if I had other comorbidities or something else, I don't remember them ever asking me if I was a hemophiliac. Mm-hmm. You think about it, you know, wow. It's like, why? And, you know, and all of it just because of race. And so I hope that, you know, my hope is we become better as a country. We appreciate each other as individuals. I'm helping a woman with a personal statement, and, you know, she says, okay, well, yes, you know, I'm Hispanic, but I don't speak Spanish. My mother's from Jamaican, Caribbean. I'm a gay woman. So, in all these different rooms, there's part of me that don't fit. And I said, you need to put that in because it shows that, Black people, we're not just this one monolithic group. We are individuals. We all have our own stories and our unique tales that we can tell. And so people have to begin to look at us as individuals, and Black is from, I got a cousin that I think is passing for white. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. So, but yet he's Black. His mother's my father's sister, and I have other cousins that are, dark skinned. And then, there's me somewhere, and wherever I am, and it's like Black is a spectrum. It's everything. Just like if you get 10 white people in the room, they're not all going to be the same shade either, or same hair color, same hair texture.
Yeah, no, we are indeed a spectrum, and I think and the only one thing I do want to say before we do sign off is you talked about thinking about more than yourself when we think about race. And I think that's something that's very different for us, right? It's not just I'm thinking about me as an individual Black person in America, but how does what I do affect all the other Black people in America? And that's a stress that I don't think people who aren't in that position understand, and how that it's stressful. It can be overwhelming. It's sometimes paralyzing, right? And that's just, I think that's just very unique to us. But with that, thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing and teaching.
You're welcome.
And I hope people will find this useful. I know I did. I love learning from new people. So I do appreciate you being so open and honest with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my story. And if you ever want me to come back and unpack some of those different subjects, I'd be happy to.
Be careful what you ask for, because I will.
I'll put together slides. I'll hook it up for you.
All right. We'll circle back. We'll do this again.
All right.
Okay. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Read Scholars Live. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, or subscribe to our YouTube channel.